Whipped for reading a stolen book, a Lakota chief built her a shelf of her own. The boards came from a supply wagon I took apart myself, the one the traders had left half-burned on the ridge above the river. 3 planks worth saving. I pulled the nails with my knife and straightened them against a stone, and I didn't know yet why I was doing it. I told myself it was because good timber shouldn't rot in the grass. That was a lie, but a quiet one, and I let it stand. My name is Standing Elk. I was 43 that winter, and I had been a headman of the Hung Papa Band for 11 years. I am not telling you this to place myself above anyone. I'm telling it so you understand the weight I already carried before she arrived, the weight of mouths and cold and the slow grinding of what was being taken from us. Every season a new line on a map we never drew. Every season fewer horses, less land to follow the game. I didn't have room inside me for much beyond what was necessary. I thought that was simply what I had become. Her name was Marguerite, half Métis, half something else she didn't name. She came with a trader's party in early November, though she was not a trader and she was not a wife. She had been traveling as a cook and a mender of things, the kind of woman who finds a use for herself in any company because no company will claim her outright. She had a small pack, a wool blanket the color of river mud, and she walked with one shoulder slightly lower than the other, which I later learned was from the way the whip had healed. The trader, a man named Brossard, brought her to our camp because he owed a debt to one of our men who had guided him east the previous spring. He said she was payment. He said it the way a man says it when he believes the people he is talking to do not notice the insult. I noticed. Our guide, a young man called Runs Far, looked at the ground when Brossard said it because he was embarrassed for all of us. I told Brossard she was not payment. I told him a person does not settle a debt that way. He looked at me with the flat expression men like him wear when they are recalculating what they can get away with. Then he shrugged and said he supposed she could stay with us through the winter, since he had no further use for her, and the fort was 4 days east. She was standing 10 feet away, listening to all of it, and she did not look at me. She looked at the tree line. The first thing I noticed about her hands was that the left one had a scar across the palm, old and white, shaped like a branch. I noticed because when I walked past her, she was holding her pack against her chest and her knuckles were tight. She was not cold. She was deciding something. She stayed. She slept in the lodge of an older widow named Yellow Bead, who had a kind habit of taking people in without making them explain themselves. The camp moved once in those first weeks, south along the creek, where the buffalo grass held longer under the snow, and Marguerite walked with us, and did not complain, and did not slow us down. She helped drag the lodge poles. She learned the weight distribution from watching the women and started carrying her end correctly by the second day. She had a way of learning things through her eyes before she ever tried them with her hands. It was maybe 3 weeks after she arrived that I found her with the book. I was coming back along the creek bank before dawn, having checked on the horses. It was the kind of cold that comes in a clear sky and puts crystals on everything, on the grass and the bark, and even the air itself if you breathe slow enough. She was sitting against the back of Yellow Bead's lodge with her knees pulled up and a piece of tallow-soaked rag burning in a small clay dish between her feet, and she was reading. The book was thin, maybe 40 pages. She didn't hear me until I was close, and then she looked up, and the expression on her face was not guilt exactly. It was the expression of someone who has been caught at something and is trying to calculate the cost. I crouched down not to take the book, just to be at her level. I asked her where she got it. She said she'd found it in the burned wagon. She said it was a botanical record, someone's notes on plants along the river, written in English and French in 2 columns. She said she thought no one would want it. I asked if she could read both columns. She said yes. I sat down in the snow beside her, and she showed me a page. The English side had careful script and ink drawings of seed pods, leaves with their veins rendered exactly. The French side had looser handwriting, with notes added in the margins, corrections. She ran her finger along a line and told me what it said, that the root of a certain plant could be packed into an infected wound to draw the poison out. I asked her how she learned to read. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that a priest had taught her when she was a girl at a mission. She said he had meant it as a gift, but other people had not seen it that way. I asked what she meant by that. She shifted the blanket on her shoulders, and in the lamplight I could see the curve of where the scar on her neck disappeared under her collar, the one I had been trying not to look at directly since she arrived. She said that the year before she came west, she had been living in a settlement near the Red River, working for a merchant family. She had borrowed a book from their house, borrowed, not stolen, though they called it stolen after a collection of natural histories with illustrations. She had taken it back to her quarters and read it by firelight. One of the older daughters had seen the light and come to look, and in the morning the merchant had come to her room with one of his men. She stopped there and looked at the tallow flame. I said she didn't have to finish. She said she wanted to. She said that the merchant had believed that a woman like her words, exactly, a woman like her had no use for reading, that it was a kind of theft of something that didn't belong to her. The man had held her arms. The merchant's wife had held the book. She said she'd kept the marks for 4 months. I did not say anything for a while. I was looking at the pages in her hands, at the seed pod drawings, at the 2 columns of careful script. There was a blue-gray quality to the light just starting at the edge of the sky behind her, and the cold had gotten into my legs from the snow, and I noticed none of it particularly, because I was thinking about a merchant in a settlement near the Red River, and the precise weight of what he had done, and what he had believed when he did it. I asked her if she liked the book. She almost smiled. She said she liked it a great deal. She said she had been working through it slowly because she didn't want it to end. I told her to keep it. She looked at me directly then, for the first time since I'd sat down. She had dark eyes, set wide, with a stillness in them that wasn't vacancy. It was the stillness of someone who has learned to give very little away until they know the ground they're standing on. She was trying to read me the way she read those columns. I let her. I went back to the horses. I thought about the book for a week after that. More accurately, I thought about where the book was living. I had seen her tuck it inside her bedding in Yellow Bead's lodge, behind her pack, between the rolled hide and the wall. She was keeping it hidden. Not from Yellow Bead, who wouldn't have cared, from the general air of the camp, from the habit of concealment she'd built up over years of having things taken from her or used against her. That bothered me in the way something specific bothers you when you can't leave it alone. I found the 3 planks from the wagon still stacked near my own lodge where I'd left them. I looked at them for a while in the morning light. They were good boards, dry inside despite the fire damage at the edges, hard enough to have weight when you picked one up. I want to tell you this plainly, the way it actually happened. I was not doing it as a gesture. I was not thinking about how it would look or what it would mean. I was thinking about the specific problem of a woman who kept her book behind her pack against a wall because every place she'd ever been had made her hide what she valued, and it seemed to me that the thing to do was to solve that problem. I split the planks down with a hand adze. I used the straightened nails. It took most of a morning and some of the afternoon, and one of the young men, a 15-year-old called Black Fox who was always underfoot, sat on a nearby log watching me and asked what I was making. I told him a shelf. He asked what a shelf was for. I told him for holding things. He watched me finish it and didn't ask anything else. It was small, 4 feet across, 8 inches deep, made from 2 planks joined at a bracket I cut and fitted from a 3rd piece, with 2 short legs that could be set against the inside wall of a lodge or hung from a lodgepole crosspiece if you drove a nail. I rubbed the surface with tallow to keep it from drying out in the cold air. The grain of the wood had been part of a wagon box, and there were still 2 small iron marks from the wheel hardware, and I didn't try to work those out. I brought it to Yellow Bead's lodge in the evening. Marguerite was inside with Yellow Bead, cutting sinew. They both looked at me when I came through the flap. I said I had made something, and I set the shelf against the wall opposite her bedroll, at about shoulder height if she was sitting. I said it was for the book. I said it was for any other books she came across, if she came across more. Yellow Bead said something in Lakota that I won't translate because it was not meant for me. Marguerite looked at the shelf. She didn't say anything for a moment. I watched her look at it, the way she studied it, the same way she studied the pages of the botanical record, the same careful attention, as if she was committing its dimensions to memory. Then she reached behind her pack and took out the book and set it on the shelf. It sat there in the lamplight, spine up, thin and worn, the only thing on 4 feet of clean pine. She looked at me then, and I was ready for her to say something, some acknowledgement, something grateful or formal, the kind of thing people say when they don't know what else to do. She didn't say any of that. She said, "There's a section on willows near the back. Have you ever used willow bark for fever?" I said yes, we used it regularly. She said the writer had an argument that fresh bark worked faster than dried, but she wasn't sure the man had tested it or just supposed it. She asked if I knew from experience. I said I believed fresh worked faster. I said I had seen it go both ways. She nodded, as though this settled something she'd been working out. Then she went back to the sinew. That was how it was with her. The winter was not easy. A disease came through in January, a lung sickness that took 4 people in our band and left others weakened for weeks. I was on my feet through most of it, and there were days I felt the tiredness like a stone carried inside the chest, the kind that doesn't lift when you sleep because you don't sleep enough for it to lift. I kept moving because I had to keep moving, because that is what a headman does, because the people need to see you on your feet when they're not sure they can stay on theirs. Marguerite worked during the sickness. She knew things not in the way a trained healer knows things, but in the way someone knows things who has lived close to necessity and paid attention to it. She knew how to keep a fire banked at exactly the right level to warm without drying, which matters when you're trying to keep wet lungs from getting worse. She knew how to make a broth that a sick person would actually drink, because it had flavor. She had the botanical record, and she had her own memory, and she moved through the sick lodges without fuss and without drama. One evening toward the end of January, I came back from checking on the outer edge of the camp, where we had 2 families in a smaller lodge that had been hit hardest. It was late, full dark, cold enough that the snow under my feet made a sound like something cracking rather than compressing. I was tired in the bone-deep way, not sleepy but empty, the kind of tired where you can feel the weight of every decision you've made that day like you're still carrying them. Marguerite was outside Yellow Bead's lodge when I came past. She had a bowl in her hands and she stopped when she saw me. She asked if I had eaten. I said I had. She held up the bowl. She said that was not what she asked. It was a thick soup, elk and dried berries, and something bitter I recognized as yarrow. She gave it to me, and I stood there in the dark and ate it standing up because there was no reason to pretend I wasn't going to eat it. She stood with me. She didn't say anything, and neither did I, and the camp was quiet except for the fire sounds from inside the lodges and one of the dogs moving around somewhere. When I gave the bowl back, she put her hand on my arm, not to hold me there, not to make a moment of it. She just put her hand on my arm for a second, the way you put a hand on something real to verify it. Then she took the bowl inside. I stood in the cold for a while after. There are things that shift without announcement. I have known horses to stand calmly for years, and then one morning they simply do not spook at anything anymore. You don't watch them become steady. You notice one day that they already are. She began to come to the council fires. Not to speak, she understood the form well enough to know that was not her place yet, maybe ever, and she didn't push at it. She sat at the edge of the circle, outside the firelight, and she listened. After the first few times I didn't notice she was there, and then I started noticing it again, which is different. Noticing because she was part of the shape of the thing. She started asking me questions in the evenings. About land, about what I had seen in the north, about what the old headman had told me when I was young. She asked well. She asked the way someone asks who already has some of the answer and wants to know if the part they don't have is what they think it is. I had not talked that way with anyone in a long time. My wife had died 4 years before, and since then the conversations I had were mostly about logistics. What was needed, what was possible, what had to be decided. Marguerite talked about things that were not logistics, and she made you feel that the things she was asking about were worth the attention she was giving them. That is rarer than you might think. In February, she brought me a book. She had traded for it with one of the agency men who sometimes came through. I didn't ask what she had traded. I understood she had something he wanted. A set of drawings she'd done on birch bark of plants along the creek, which he had apparently wanted to send east. The book was a collection of recorded speeches, Great Plains leaders talking to commissioners in the eastern cities, transcribed by someone and published in a small run by a press that had gone out of business. She said she had read through it twice. She said that some of the transcriptions were careless, that she could tell the interpreters had missed things or softened things, but that you could still hear the men underneath the translations if you read carefully enough. She held the book out to me. I asked why she was giving it to me. She said she thought I would recognize some of the things they had tried to say. I sat with the book that night for a long time. She was right. There were words in those transcriptions that were the wrong words, that were smaller than the words that must have been spoken, but you could hear the shape beneath them the way you can hear the sound of a river from a distance even when it's not in sight. Some of those men were dead. Some of them I had heard of when I was younger. I read their names in the carefully poor English of the transcriptions, and I thought about what it costs a man to speak his full mind into a room where no one will hear the full weight of it, and how he speaks anyway, because what else is there? I went to Yellow Bead's lodge early the next morning. Marguerite was already up. I gave her the book back. She looked at me. I told her I wanted her to keep it on the shelf next to the botanical record. That it should stay together with the things she had that were worth keeping. She held the book against her chest, the way she'd held her pack that first day I saw her, tight like a thing she was deciding about. Then she looked at me, and I want to try to tell you what was in that look, though I'll probably not get it exactly right. It wasn't gratitude, or not mainly. It was something more like recognition, the look of someone who has spent a long time being read wrong by everyone in the room, and has just been read right, and is absorbing the strangeness of it. She said my name. Standing Elk. She said it the way you say a word that you've been thinking about before you say it out loud. I told her the shelf could hold more. She almost laughed. Not quite, she had a way of almost laughing where the laugh stopped just at the edge and became something warmer. She said she was already looking. Spring came hard that year. Fast thaw, the creek over its banks for 12 days and then dry and cold again in a single night. By late March the camp was moving again, and there was the usual work of moving, everything packed and loaded, the horses sorted, the decisions about which route and at what pace. The morning we pulled out I was at the front of the line with the older men, which is where I usually was. I don't know what made me look back. Maybe nothing, maybe just the habit of counting heads. I looked back down the line and Marguerite was walking near the middle, her pack on her back, her shoulders even now, both even, and I had not noticed until that moment that the lower shoulder had come up, that she was walking differently than she had walked when she arrived. She had the botanical record in her outer coat pocket, the worn spine just visible. She was talking to one of the younger women, a girl called Sparrow, who was pointing at something along the creek bank, probably a plant, and Marguerite was leaning over to look. She had been here 4 months. She was not a guest anymore, and she was not a worker, and she was not a woman the camp was housing out of obligation. She was something harder to name. She was here. I turned back to the trail. There is a moment I think about sometimes, from that May when the country opened up and the weather turned and you could believe in things again. We had stopped for a noon rest at a wide bend in the river. Most of the camp was eating or sleeping. I was sitting on a flat stone at the water's edge, just sitting, no task, which was unusual enough that I noticed it. She came and sat down on a rock nearby, not next to me but close. She had the botanical record with her, and she was reading the French column. I watched the river for a while. The water was fast and clear from the snowmelt, and there were insects already on the surface in the slack water by the bank. After a while she said, "In the French notes, the writer says there's a stand of yellow willow 2 days upstream that he claims you can hear at night when the wind is right, because the branches are hollow at a certain growth stage." I said I had heard them once when I was 20, that it sounded like someone breathing. She turned a page and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I haven't told many people about the whipping." I waited. She said she had told me because she hadn't felt like I would use it for anything. That some people, when they know something that hurt you, they carry it like a tool. They don't mean to, necessarily. They just reach for it when they need something from you. I said I understood. She said she knew I did. She said that was why she told me. I watched the water. She read. One of the horses stamped somewhere behind us. The sun was full on the river and the light was making the surface do things that are difficult to describe, a kind of movement that is not the current, more like the river is breathing too. She closed the book and turned to look at me, fully, the way she rarely did because she was careful with direct looks. She said, "You built me a shelf when you had never been asked to build me anything." I said it wasn't complicated. She said, "I know. That's the part that mattered." Then she stood up and smoothed her coat and said there was a child on the other side of camp who had been coughing since morning, and she wanted to look in on him. She walked back toward the camp. I watched the river. The sound of the water and the sound of the grass moving and, somewhere distant, the horses. I sat there for a while, longer than I needed to. She stayed. I want to say it simply because that's how it was, without announcement, without ceremony that I can point to. She stayed. The seasons moved and she was in them. She learned more Lakota and she taught some of the younger women to read, which started arguments with 2 of the older men, and which I let her handle herself because I had watched her argue and she did not need my help. She won the second argument, and the first man came around on his own by the following spring. She acquired more books. I don't know entirely how. She had a talent for finding them in unlikely places, in the effects of people who died and left no one to claim things, in trades at the agency where she'd built up a reputation for fair dealing. The shelf filled. I built another one. She told me once, in the winter of our second year, that she had spent most of her life feeling like she was standing slightly outside of every room she was in, that she was useful to whatever was happening, and that people were not unkind exactly, but that she was never quite of it, never inside the shape of where she was. I asked if it was different here. She was quiet for a moment, the way she was quiet when she was deciding how exact to be. Then she said, "You made a place for the things I valued when no one had ever done that. You made a place for the things I valued before you made any claim on me at all. That's the difference." I didn't have a ready answer for that. I am not a man who has a ready answer for most things. I sat with it, and she seemed to expect that I would, which is one of the things about her that I was by then no longer surprised by but was still grateful for. It was her way of seeing clearly, without softening what she saw or hardening it either. She looked at you and she told you what was there, and what was there when she looked at me was something I had stopped expecting to be seen. Not the headman, not the weight or the office of it. The man who'd sat down in the snow by the tallow lamp and wanted to know what she was reading. You get to an age where you stop expecting that. You think the years have made you into something more specific than a person, more purely functional, the leader, the provider, the one who decides things and you accept it because there is honor in it. There is real honor in being those things, but something else goes quiet. Something you don't miss until it stirs. She stirred it. In the fall of that second year, when the air was sharp and the leaves had gone, and the sky had that particular emptiness that comes only in late October on the plains, I gave her a third shelf. I had built it over the summer from planks I'd salvaged and dried slowly, thicker than the first two, with a small carved edge rail so things wouldn't slide. I put it on the floor of the lodge we were sharing by then, on her side, which she understood immediately was her side, and no one had needed to say so. She ran her hand along the edge rail. She tested the depth with her forearm. She said it was beautiful work. I said the light would be better on that wall in the morning. She looked at me across the space between us, in the light of the fire, the kind of look she'd given me at the river that day, direct, full, open. She had such stillness in that look, not reserve, not armor, just honesty without embellishment. Like those two columns in the botanical record. What is true in one language, what is true in another, side by side. She crossed the space and she put her arms around me and held on, and I put my hand against the back of her head. She was warm and she smelled like smoke, and the dried herbs she kept in a cloth pouch at her belt. We stood like that while the fire settled. I thought about the 3 planks from the burned wagon. I thought about the nails I had straightened against a stone, and the lie I had told myself about good timber not going to waste in the grass. It hadn't been about the timber. It had been about her. It had been about a woman sitting by a tallow lamp in the dark before dawn, reading a book she was hiding, careful and hungry, and trying not to be noticed. It had been about the specific wrong of a man with a whip who'd believed that reading didn't belong to her. I thought, this is what I am for. Not only the decisions and the weight of the camp and the slow grinding work of keeping people alive and whole in a world that is always taking more than it gives. Also this, being the one who sees what someone has been denied and makes a place for it. Being the rock that someone chooses to lean against, not because they have to, but because they've tested the ground and found it solid. That is not a small thing. Outside the snow was starting. I could hear it against the hide of the lodge, the softest sound, like something quietly arriving. I held on.